You see me now, a quiet man behind this coffee counter, stirring cream into a cup. You'd never guess that I once commanded a private jet, owned an estate so vast you needed a golf cart to cross it, or that my bank account held more zeros than I could count. I was David, a multi-millionaire, made overnight by a single stroke of luck. Then, over 2 decades, I systematically dismantled everything I'd built. How does one go from having it all to having nothing but memories? It's a question that's haunted me for years, and it's a story that begins not with a lavish investment, but with a nagging frustration in my cramped garage. Let me take you back to a time when my biggest concern was the pile of bills on the kitchen table, not where to moor my yacht. I was in my early 30s, a factory engineer, decent pay, decent house, but nothing spectacular. Just another cog in the machine grinding out a living. My wife, Sarah, God bless her patient soul, was my high school sweetheart, and we had 2 young kids, Emily and Michael. They were our world, but providing them with that world felt like a constant uphill battle. Every month it was the same dance. Pay the mortgage, the car loans, the groceries, and then watch the balance dwindle to almost nothing. The dreams I had of giving them everything, of whisking Sarah away on adventures, felt perpetually out of reach. I wasn't unhappy. Not exactly. But there was this gnawing feeling of mediocrity, a sense that I was capable of more, but trapped by circumstance. The weight of responsibility was heavy, and I often found myself staring at the ceiling late at night, wondering if this was all there was. I wanted to break free, not just for myself, but for Sarah and the kids. I wanted to leave a legacy, something beyond a modest pension and a paid-off house. My big break didn't come from some elaborate business plan or a high-powered Wall Street connection. It came from a simple, everyday frustration. Anyone who's ever tried to assemble flat-pack furniture knows the agony. Confusing instructions, a dozen different screws, tiny Allen wrenches that strip easily. One particularly infuriating Saturday, wrestling with a new bookshelf for Michael's room, an idea sparked. It was a simple concept, really, almost embarrassingly so in hindsight. What if there was one universal connector, one ingenious piece that could replace all those disparate screws, dowels, and cam locks? Something that made assembly intuitive, quick, and almost foolproof. I started sketching. Late nights in the garage, the smell of sawdust and stale coffee my constant companions. Sarah would sometimes bring me a sandwich, her eyes tired but supportive. She always believed in my tinkering, even when it led to more mess than progress. I bought cheap tools, experimented with plastics, then metals. There were countless failures, prototypes that snapped, jammed, or simply didn't hold. But I was obsessed. The Unilock, as I christened it, wasn't just a gadget. It was my ticket out, my silent promise to my family that things would be different. I poured every spare moment, every ounce of creative energy into it. I learned about metallurgy, spent hours watching manufacturing processes online, trying to design something simple enough to be mass-produced, but strong enough to be truly revolutionary. The patent application process was a labyrinth of legal jargon and fees that ate into our already strained savings, but I pushed through, driven by an unshakable belief. After the patent was secured, the real challenge began: selling it. I faced rejection after rejection. Small furniture companies thought it was too radical, too expensive to retool for. Larger ones didn't see the need to fix what wasn't broken enough. I heard no so many times, it started to sound like my own name. But I kept pushing. I knew Unilock had value. I just needed someone else to see it. I flew to industry trade shows on my own dime, setting up a tiny booth next to multinational corporations. I handed out prototypes, gave my pitch until my voice was hoarse, and collected a stack of business cards that mostly led to dead ends. It was disheartening, truly soul-crushing at times. There were moments I almost gave up, almost convinced myself I was just a dreamer, a fool who'd gambled our future on a metal connector. Sarah was my rock, always reminding me of the simple genius of the idea, of my own persistence. Then came the call. From Global Furnishings, a titan in the industry, a name so big it felt surreal they even knew mine. They wanted a meeting. I remember putting on my best, slightly ill-fitting suit, feeling like an imposter walking into their gleaming corporate headquarters. The meeting was a blur of power suits jargon and intimidating silence. They weren't interested in a partnership, they clarified. They wanted to buy the patent outright. My heart pounded against my ribs like a drum. I tried to play it cool, but inside I was a nervous wreck. The lead executive, a sharp woman named Eleanor Vance, finally delivered the number. $5 million. Cash. My ears rang. $5 million. Overnight. It was more money than I had ever dreamed of seeing in my lifetime. My mind raced, trying to process the magnitude of it all. It meant freedom, security, everything I had ever wanted for my family. I signed the contract. My hand was shaking slightly, but the pen felt heavy, significant. I remember the silence in the car with Sarah on the way home, a silence so profound it was almost deafening. We just looked at each other, tears welling up in our eyes. Relief, disbelief, joy. A mixture of emotions that was almost too much to bear. We pulled over to the side of the road, and she just hugged me, holding on to me like she never wanted to let go. We cried together, not tears of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated relief, and the promise of a future transformed. The mortgage, the bills, the constant worry, gone. Just like that. That was the turning point, the very beginning of it all. And before I tell you what I did with that first million, I want to know where you're watching from. Leave your city and country in the comments below. It's incredible to think how far this story can reach, and I'm always fascinated to see who connects with it. I checked my bank account every hour for the next few days, watching that number, that glorious, impossible number, sitting there, mine. It felt like a dream, one I kept pinching myself to ensure was real. The first thing I did, after a modest celebration dinner, was pay off every single debt. The mortgage, the car loans, every credit card. The feeling of zero debt was even more liberating than the initial rush of the money itself. It was pure, unadulterated financial freedom. Then we bought our dream house. Not a mansion yet, but a beautiful, spacious home with a big yard for the kids, a proper office for me, and a kitchen Sarah had always wanted. We paid cash. Seeing her face light up as she walked through it, knowing it was truly ours, no strings attached, was worth every single minute I'd spent in that cold garage. I quit my job, of course. Handing in my resignation was one of the most satisfying moments of my life, not out of spite, but out of a profound sense of accomplishment and a quiet confidence that my future lay elsewhere. I promised myself, looking out at the meticulously manicured lawn of our new home, the kids laughing in the distance, that I would never again worry about money. This wasn't just a lucky break, it was a springboard. I would build an empire from this, not just for myself, but for generations. I felt invincible, truly on top of the world, with the whole future stretching out before me, ripe for the taking. The ambitious young man I was, with just $5 million in his pocket, truly believed that was just the beginning. And it was. The beginning of something far grander and far more tragic than I could ever have imagined. The first few years were a blur of pure, unadulterated bliss. It felt like we were living someone else's life, a movie version of our own. We traveled the world, not on cramped package tours, but in first-class cabins where flight attendants knew our names. We saw the Colosseum in Rome without waiting in line, strolled through the Louvre in Paris after hours on a private tour. I bought Sarah a diamond necklace for our anniversary that cost more than our first house, not out of ostentation, but simply because I could. Because seeing the look on her face was worth every penny. For a while, the money was a tool for joy, a way to reclaim the years we'd spent worrying. We showered our kids with opportunities, the best schools, music lessons, anything their hearts desired. The initial fortune of $5 million felt like an ocean, impossibly deep and endless. But something insidious began to happen, a slow, creeping change that I was completely blind to at the time. The money, which had started as a source of freedom, began to build walls. Our old friends, the ones we'd had barbecues with in our modest backyard, started to seem distant. Our conversations became strained. They'd talk about getting a promotion or saving up for a family vacation to Disney World, and I'd just nod along, unable to relate. How could I talk about the stress of managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio when they were worried about making their next mortgage payment? There was no malice in it on either side, just a growing, unspoken chasm. We stopped getting invited to their neighborhood parties, and honestly, a part of me was relieved. Their problems seemed so small, so mundane. I started to crave the company of people who understood my new reality. I joined the most exclusive country club in the state, a place with sprawling golf courses and hushed dining rooms where deals worth more than entire towns were made with a handshake. I traded my comfortable sedan for a gleaming silver Porsche, then an Aston Martin. The thrill wasn't just in the speed, but in the valet's nod of recognition, the subtle affirmation of my status. I started a charitable foundation in my family's name, and soon my name was on a wing of the local hospital and on plaques at the symphony. I told myself it was about giving back, but if I'm being brutally honest with myself now, it was more about the applause. It was about seeing my name etched in brass, a permanent testament to my success. The narrative in my head began to shift. I was no longer the lucky factory engineer. I was David, the visionary, the philanthropist, the man who had earned his place at the table. The Unilock wasn't a lucky break anymore. It was a product of my unique genius. I deserved this, all of it. It was at one of those sterile charity galas, surrounded by old money and new, that I met Marcus Thorne. Marcus was everything I aspired to be. He was in his late 50s, impeccably dressed, with a silver mane of hair and a charisma that filled the room. He moved with the effortless confidence of someone who had never known a day of financial worry in his life. He made his fortune in high-end real estate development, crafting exclusive resorts in exotic locations. He approached me, a glass of champagne in hand, and didn't talk about my invention. He talked about me. He'd heard about my sharp instincts, my disruptive thinking. He made me feel like I wasn't just a newcomer, but a peer. We had lunch the following week. My financial advisor at the time, a careful, meticulous man named Mark, had put my money into a conservative, diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds. It was growing at a steady, sensible pace. When I described this to Marcus, he gave a soft, pitying chuckle. "David," he said, leaning forward, his voice a conspiratorial whisper, "that's not wealth. That's a retirement account. Money like yours shouldn't be sleeping. It should be working, building empires. You're a creator, an innovator. Why are you letting a number cruncher treat you like a pensioner?" His words landed like a spark on dry tinder. He was right. I wasn't a pensioner. I was a king, and my kingdom should be expanding. Marcus became my mentor, my guide into the rarefied world of the ultra-wealthy. He introduced me to a different kind of investing, private equity, venture capital, and his specialty, speculative real estate. It was a world of risk and monumental reward, and it was intoxicating. A few months into our friendship, he invited me to a private dinner at his penthouse. Over a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car, he unveiled his masterpiece, the Emerald Cay Resort. It was a planned development on a tiny, privately owned island in the Caribbean that he claimed was the next St. Bart's. He rolled out architectural drawings of infinity pools cascading into turquoise waters, renderings of overwater bungalows with private butlers. He spoke of government approvals already secured, of a private airstrip, of a waiting list of celebrities and billionaires eager to buy in. He was selling a dream, and I bought every square inch of it. He wasn't asking for a small investment. He was offering me a chance to be a founding partner, a $1 million buy-in. It was a significant chunk of my liquid capital, but in my mind I was already calculating the returns, imagining myself hosting parties on the deck of my own villa at Emerald Cay. This wasn't like buying a stock. This was creating a landmark. This was legacy. The next morning I called Mark, my advisor, my voice buzzing with an excitement I hadn't felt since the day I sold my patent. I laid out the whole plan. I expected him to be thrilled, to share my vision. Instead, there was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "David," he finally said, his voice laced with concern, "this is highly speculative. An offshore, illiquid asset with no proven track record. Have you seen the due diligence? The geological surveys? The political risk assessment for the region?" His questions felt like accusations, like small-minded hurdles in the way of my grand vision. "Mark, this is Marcus Thorne," I said, a touch of irritation in my tone. "He doesn't make mistakes," Mark sighed. "Even the best make mistakes, David. Men like Marcus are brilliant salesmen. They sell access, exclusivity, a story. Please, let my team do a full analysis before you commit to anything." But I didn't want analysis. I wanted in. Mark's caution felt like an insult to my judgment, a challenge to my new status. I saw him as a relic of my old life, a man who thought in terms of safe, boring percentages, not in paradigm shifts. I needed to prove to Marcus, and more importantly to myself, that I was a player, that I wasn't just some lucky guy who stumbled into money, but a bold visionary who knew how to make it multiply. My consultant called me the day the wire transfer went through. He must have seen the massive withdrawal. His voice was strained, professional, but I could hear the deep disappointment beneath it. "David, I hope I'm wrong about this," he said, his words measured and careful. "But you need to understand something. Men like Marcus don't sell investment opportunities. They sell dreams. They sell you a vision of yourself you want to believe. Just be careful." I laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Relax, Mark. You have to spend money to make money." I hung up the phone feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and annoyance. I felt pity for him, for his small, cautious world. It was the first time I had ever explicitly chosen the intoxicating allure of ego over the quiet voice of wisdom. And as I looked out the window of my sprawling home office, I didn't know it then, but I had just personally laid the first, perfectly cut cornerstone in the foundation of my own ruin. Weeks turned into months, and the Emerald Cay Resort remained a beautiful, expensive drawing. Marcus was a master of evasion, always armed with a plausible explanation. There were unforeseen permitting delays, supply chain issues, political negotiations with the local government. Each update was delivered with his signature unflappable confidence, always ending with a casual, "These things are normal at this level, David. Patience is the virtue of the truly wealthy." My $1 million was trapped in a Caribbean limbo, an illiquid monument to my first major misstep. A smarter man would have seen this as a warning, a bright red flag. But my ego had become a fortress, and it interpreted caution as weakness. Admitting I'd been duped was unthinkable. It would mean the narrative I was building around myself, David, the astute investor, was a fiction. So I did the opposite. I doubled down. I convinced myself that the resort's stagnation wasn't a failure but a lesson. I needed more control. I needed to be the one calling the shots, not a passive partner. The adrenaline I once got from seeing my bank account grow was now replaced by a far more potent drug, the thrill of the deal. The game itself became the objective. It was no longer about the money. It was about proving I was the smartest man in any room I entered. It was about winning. To that end, I decided to formalize my new identity. I established my own investment firm, leasing the top floor of the newest glass and steel skyscraper in the city. I named it, with a staggering lack of humility, David Ventures. The first official act of David Ventures was to sever my last tie to my old life. I fired Mark. I did it over a sterile lunch at the country club. He tried to reason with me, showing me charts and projections, his voice calm and logical. He pointed out that despite the stalled resort project, my core portfolio was still healthy and secure. "Don't throw away the foundation for the sake of a more glamorous roof, David," he pleaded. I looked at him across the table, at his sensible suit and his earnest, worried expression, and I didn't see a protector. I saw an anchor. I saw the past. "Mark," I said coolly, "I appreciate what you did for me in the beginning, but your vision is too small for where I'm going." The hurt in his eyes was genuine, but I had already walled off the part of me that might have cared. In his place, I hired a team of young, hungry sharks, Ivy League graduates with impeccable resumes, and a ravenous ambition that mirrored my own. They were brilliant, quick-witted, and most importantly, they never questioned my instincts. They revered me. I was the visionary, the rainmaker. My gut feelings were treated as gospel. They built complex financial models that always seemed to prove my hunches correct, and they celebrated my riskiest moves with boisterous enthusiasm. My office became an echo chamber of my own making, a place where the only opinion that mattered was mine. reflected back at me a dozen times over. While my professional world was a symphony of validation, my home life was becoming increasingly discordant. Sarah, my constant, my anchor to reality, saw the change in me with painful clarity. She saw the man she loved being replaced by a caricature. Our dinners were no longer conversations. They were my monologues, recitations of my day's triumphs, my brilliant maneuvers in the market. She would listen patiently, but her eyes held a sadness I couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. She missed the man who tinkered in the garage, the man whose dreams were about family, not market capitalization. "I feel like I don't know you anymore, David," she said one evening, her voice barely a whisper. We were in the cavernous living room of our mansion, a room so large it felt like it absorbed all intimacy. "You're always performing. It's like the money is a costume you can't take off." I took it as criticism, as a failure on her part to appreciate what I had built for us. "This costume is what pays for this house, Sarah," I retorted, my tone sharper than I intended. "It's what pays for the kids' schools, for our vacations. Maybe you should try to be a little more grateful." The words hung in the air between us, ugly and cold. We were standing on opposite sides of a canyon that I had dug myself. The ultimate test of my hubris came disguised as an unmissable opportunity. My team brought me a startup called Solara Innovations, a clean energy company that claimed to have invented a revolutionary method of solar power generation. The founders were charismatic, fast-talking young men who spoke in a torrent of technical jargon and visionary promises. They showed me slick presentations of a world powered by their technology. It was world-changing stuff, and I would be in on the ground floor. My team was ecstatic, calling it a 10-bagger at minimum. We did our due diligence, which in reality meant my sycophants confirmed everything the founders said, their judgment clouded by the potential for a massive payday. That weekend I was so excited, I brought the prospectus home to show Sarah, foolishly hoping she would finally see the genius I saw in myself. She sat at the kitchen island, the same one I'd bought her to celebrate our new life, and quietly read through the document. She wasn't an expert, but she had something my entire team of analysts lacked: simple, unadulterated common sense. She looked up, her brow furrowed. "David, this all sounds amazing," she said carefully. "But it's all projections. It says their prototype is lab-validated, but where are the real-world results? Where are the independent tests? It seems too good to be true." Her simple, logical question felt like a personal attack. I snatched the papers from her hand, my face flushing with anger. "What do you know about energy markets, Sarah, or venture capital?" My voice was laced with a condescension that still makes me cringe today. "This is what I do. This is why we have this life. Just leave the business to me. Go plan our trip to Monaco." I walked out of the room, leaving her sitting alone at the island, her face a mask of shock and hurt. I invested $3 million into Solara Innovations. 6 months later, an investigative journalism piece revealed the entire company was a sophisticated fraud. The revolutionary technology was a sham, the prototypes faked. The founders had vanished, along with the investment capital from dozens of people like me. The news hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just the loss of the money, it was the public humiliation. But even that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Sarah had been right. That night she came into my office, the article printed out in her hand. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't have to. The look in her eyes said it all. "Is it true, David? Did we lose it all?" she asked, her voice trembling. And in that moment, faced with the consequences of my own monumental arrogance, I couldn't bear to admit the truth. I couldn't bear to admit that she, with her common sense, had been wiser than me and my entire team of experts. So I lied. "It's just a media beat-up," I said, forcing a confident smile. "A temporary setback. I've already handled it. The business is fine. We're fine." The next day I took out a high-interest loan against some of our real estate holdings to cover the hole in my company's finances, hiding the loss from everyone except myself. By lying to my wife for the first time about money, I wasn't just hiding a financial mistake. I was consciously taking a hammer to the very foundation upon which my entire life, my family, and my own identity had been built. And the cracks were beginning to show. The lie about the Solara disaster was a cancer. It started small but quickly metastasized, infecting every aspect of my life. From that day forward, I was no longer just an investor. I was the frantic stage manager of an elaborate production titled The Unflappable Success of David. The public facade of my life became more important than the reality. I threw more extravagant parties, donated more conspicuously to charity, and bought a larger yacht, all while secretly juggling loans and leveraging one asset to cover the losses of another. My financial life, once a simple ledger of assets and income, had become a dizzying shell game. I was constantly shifting money around, robbing Peter to pay Paul, all to keep the music from stopping. Years passed in this state of high-wire anxiety. I was in my early 50s now, the youthful ambition in my eyes replaced by a permanent, haunted tension that no amount of success could erase. On the surface, David Ventures was thriving. We were featured in business magazines, lauded for our aggressive growth strategy. But I knew the truth. The entire enterprise was a house of cards, built on a foundation of debt and propped up by a continuous stream of new, risky ventures needed to pay off the old ones. The profits were paper-thin, the liabilities monumental. I was running on a treadmill, and the speed was constantly increasing. I couldn't slow down, and I couldn't get off. Sarah and I coexisted in a state of quiet, polite estrangement. She had stopped asking questions about the business years ago. My condescension and secrecy had built a wall between us that felt insurmountable. We lived parallel lives under the same opulent roof, our conversations limited to logistics about the children and social obligations. The warmth that had once been the cornerstone of our marriage had evaporated, leaving behind a chilly, unspoken truce. She knew something was fundamentally wrong, but she had no idea of the scale of the deception. The kids were older now, in expensive private universities, their futures supposedly secured by a fortune that I knew was largely an illusion. The pressure of maintaining that illusion was immense, a physical weight on my shoulders every single day. I knew I couldn't sustain the charade forever. The loans were coming due, the interest payments were crippling, and my reputation for having the Midas touch was beginning to tarnish after a few more high-profile investments failed to deliver. I was hemorrhaging money, and my options were narrowing. I saw only one way out, a single monumental win, a home run so massive it would not only clear all my debts, but also validate the reckless path I had chosen. I needed a victory that would silence all the whispers of doubt, especially the ones inside my own head. That's when the opportunity presented itself. It came through an international consortium, a shadowy group of global financiers with whom Marcus Thorne still held some sway. It was a high-risk, high-reward play of the highest order, a mining operation for rare earth minerals in a remote, politically unstable region of South America. These minerals were essential for modern electronics, and the demand was skyrocketing. The geological surveys promised a deposit of almost mythical proportions. If it paid off, the returns would be astronomical, not in the millions, but in the hundreds of millions. It was the kind of deal that makes legends or breaks them completely. But there was a catch. The buy-in was substantial. To secure a meaningful stake in the venture, I needed to come up with $10 million in liquid capital. Immediately. $10 million. It was a figure that even at my peak would have been a stretch. Now it was an impossibility. My cash reserves were depleted. My credit lines were maxed out. Every asset I owned was already leveraged to the hilt. Except for one. The family home. The beautiful, sprawling estate that was the first true symbol of my success. The one place that was supposed to be a sanctuary, untouched by the risks and turmoil of my business world. It was in my and Sarah's names, fully paid for, a bastion of security in our increasingly fragile lives. Beyond that, there were the custodial accounts for our children's futures and the retirement funds I had set up for Sarah and myself in the very beginning, portfolios that even I had considered sacred. Until now. The decision to cross that final line didn't come in a single dramatic moment. It was a slow, agonizing process of self-deception. I told myself it wasn't a gamble. It was a calculated investment. I told myself it was for them, for Sarah, for Emily, for Michael. This one final push would secure their futures forever, making them wealthier than they could ever imagine. I rationalized that hiding it from them was a kindness, protecting them from unnecessary worry. I would mortgage the house, liquidate the funds, make the investment, and then, when the profits rolled in, I would quietly replenish everything, and they would never be the wiser. They would only see the results of my brilliance. Working with a discreet private lender who asked few questions, I began the process, moving with a cold, methodical precision that frightened even me. I forged Sarah's signature on the mortgage documents, a crime I justified as a necessary evil. I called a different broker, one my team didn't use, and gave the order to liquidate the retirement and college funds, overriding the long-term investment strategies with the demand for immediate cash. Each signature, each phone call, felt like a betrayal. I felt a profound sense of self-loathing, but the desperation for that one big win was a more powerful force. It was the only way to redeem myself, the only way to make the last decade of lies and stress mean something. I remember the night I signed the final documents for the wire transfer, alone in my cavernous, marble-floored office. The house was silent. The only sound was the scratching of my pen and the frantic beating of my own heart. Just as I finished, the door creaked open. It was Sarah holding a cup of tea, a peace offering she sometimes made in our Cold War. She looked at the mountain of paperwork on my desk, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar letterheads. "Working late?" she asked, her voice soft. "What's all this?" I felt a surge of panic, but my years of practice in the art of deception took over. I leaned back in my chair, forcing a relaxed, confident smile that felt like a mask. "It's our future, honey," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "I've just secured a position in a deal that's going to set us up for life. Not just our lives, but the kids' lives, their kids' lives. This is the one, Sarah, the legacy piece." She looked at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the old trust in her eyes, a desperate desire to believe me. She smiled back, a fragile, hopeful expression. "That's wonderful, David." But as she turned to leave, her smile faded, and her eyes were filled with a deep, bottomless sadness. She didn't know the specifics, but she knew the man she married would never have bet their home on a promise. She knew she was looking at a stranger. As I signed that last document, I wasn't investing in our future. I was placing the last of my chips, my home, my family's security, my very soul, onto a single number on the roulette wheel. And the devil was patiently waiting to spin. And the devil didn't just spin the wheel, he owned the whole casino. Before I tell you how a lifetime of work and a web of lies disintegrated in a matter of weeks, if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the time to do it. And I have to ask you, looking back at this train wreck with me, what do you think my biggest mistake was? Was it the arrogance, the greed, or was it simply trusting the wrong people? Let me know in the comments. I read them all, and I wonder if you can pinpoint the exact moment the poison became fatal. For 2 weeks I lived in a state of suspended animation, a self-imposed purgatory of anxious hope. I checked the international news wires 100 times a day, searching for any scrap of information about the mining project. My entire existence was staked on a geological survey and a prayer. I told myself this was how titans operated, by taking colossal risks that would terrify lesser men. I was not a gambler. I was a visionary playing for the highest stakes. The end did not arrive with a phone call or a market crash. It came on a Tuesday morning, broadcast in high definition on a 24-hour news channel I had playing in the background. The anchor, with detached professionalism, reported on escalating political instability in the very South American nation where my salvation was buried. I watched grainy footage of military vehicles rolling through a city square, of a grim-faced general declaring a new provisional government. The reporter mentioned the nationalization of all foreign-owned mining and energy assets. The words hung in the air, clinical and devastating. Nationalization. My first reaction was denial, a desperate, visceral rejection of what my eyes were seeing. This was a temporary flare-up, a posture for negotiations. My partners in the consortium were powerful. They had influence, connections. They wouldn't let this happen. I spent the day frantically trying to reach Marcus and my other contacts. My calls went to voicemail. My emails received no reply. A cold, creeping dread began to seep into my bones, chilling me from the inside out. The confirmation came the next morning, not in a personal call, but in a terse, jargon-filled press release from the consortium, citing the unforeseeable geopolitical event, they were invoking the force majeure clause. All contracts were void. All investments were lost. There would be no recourse, no litigation, no recovery. It was over. The $10 million, my home, my children's future, my last shred of hope, had simply evaporated into the humid jungle air. The financial collapse that followed was not a slow decline, it was an avalanche. The news of the consortium's failure spread through the financial world like a contagion, and I was patient zero. At 9:01 a.m. the next day, the phone started ringing, and it did not stop. It was my primary bank, the one that had financed David Ventures for years. The voice on the other end was no longer the deferential partner who'd invited me to play golf. It was a cold, impersonal functionary. He informed me that due to the material change in my risk profile, they were calling in my entire line of credit. Immediately. All of it. Before I could even process that, my broker called. The precipitous drop in my net worth had triggered a series of catastrophic margin calls. My remaining stock portfolio, the last vestiges of my original fortune, was being liquidated to cover the deficits. Not sold, but slaughtered at fire sale prices. Then came the call from the private lender, the shark who held the mortgage to my home. There was no pretense of civility. He informed me I was in default of our loan covenant, a clause buried deep in the fine print about maintaining a specific net worth, and he was initiating foreclosure proceedings. Effective immediately. I pleaded. I tried to negotiate, but it was like reasoning with a stone wall. Each call was a new wave, battering the fragile remnants of my empire, washing another piece of my life away. The creditors, the suppliers, the investors in my smaller, now doomed projects, they all wanted their pound of flesh, and they wanted it now. The edifice of my success, so carefully constructed over 2 decades, was being dismantled in a matter of hours. The worst moment, the one that remains seared into my memory with agonizing clarity, was telling Sarah. I found her in the garden, tending to her roses, the one part of our opulent life that still felt genuinely hers. I couldn't sugarcoat it. I couldn't lie anymore. My voice was hollow, stripped of all its usual bluster and confidence. I told her everything. The Solara fraud, the years of secret loans, the shell game, and, finally, the last desperate gamble with our home and our children's security. I laid bare the full, ugly tapestry of my deceit. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just stood there, trowel in hand, and looked at me. And in her eyes, I saw something far worse than anger, the death of the last glimmer of respect she had for me. I saw the complete and utter disillusionment of a woman realizing the man she had spent her life with was a fraud, a ghost, a hollow man. "So it was all a lie," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "All of it. The galas, the vacations, the confidence. It was all just a performance." She finally dropped the trowel, turned, and walked back into the house without another word. The silence she left behind was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The days that followed were a blur of humiliation. The process server at the front door handing me a thick stack of lawsuits. The repo men, polite but firm, taking the Aston Martin and the Porsche. I had to call a broker who specialized in distressed personal assets to sell my collection of rare watches for pennies on the dollar. The friends I had cultivated at the country club suddenly stopped returning my calls. Marcus Thorne, my great mentor, might as well have dropped off the face of the earth. The name that had been etched in brass on hospital walls was now splashed across the business section in headlines about bankruptcy and financial ruin. The final act was the eviction notice. The bank owned our home now. We had 30 days to vacate. We spent those last weeks in the cavernous, silent mansion like ghosts, packing the fragments of our life into cardboard boxes. We didn't pack the fine art or the crystal. Those were all being seized. We packed photographs, the children's old drawings, the worn paperback Sarah loved, the small insignificant things that held the real story of our life together. On the last day, as the moving van pulled away with our few remaining possessions, I stood with Sarah in the grand empty foyer. The echo of our footsteps on the marble floor was a mournful sound. I looked at her, at the deep lines of pain and exhaustion on her face that I had put there. "I am so sorry, Sarah," I whispered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. She just looked at me, her eyes empty, and nodded once before walking out the front door, leaving it open behind her. I took one last look around the magnificent prison I had built for us. I had spent 20 years chasing a number in a bank account, believing it was the ultimate measure of a man. And as I stood there with nothing, absolutely nothing, I realized the terrible truth. I hadn't just lost a fortune. I had lost myself. The fall is a violent, shocking event, but the aftermath is a slow, quiet drowning in the sea of your own consequences. We didn't move into a charming little cottage to start over. We moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown part of the city, a place with stained carpets and the perpetual smell of boiled cabbage in the hallway. The sudden silence was the most deafening part. For 20 years, my life had been a cacophony of ringing phones, board meetings, and the hum of a dozen appliances in a house too large to hear yourself think. Now there was only the drip of a leaky faucet and the vast, empty space between myself and Sarah. We were two strangers trapped in a lifeboat, with nothing left to say because the storm had been entirely of my own making. After a few weeks of this agonizing quiet, she finally broke it. She didn't want the divorce because the money was gone. If we had lost it to a market crash, an illness, or some other twist of fate, she would have been by my side, fighting with me. She wanted the divorce because she finally understood that the money had never been the point. It had been a tool I used to build a fortress around my own ego, a fortress so high that it had locked her, the kids, and my own soul out. "I can survive being poor, David," she told me, her voice weary but resolute. "We've been there before. What I can't survive is living with a ghost. The man I married vanished years ago, and I don't think he's ever coming back." She was right. The man she married wouldn't have forged her signature. He wouldn't have lied to her face. He wouldn't have gambled their entire world on a whisper of a promise. I signed the papers without a fight. It was the last and only consequence I had left to give. Loneliness became my new reality. At 50-something years old, with a name that was now synonymous with spectacular failure, my professional prospects were non-existent. The skills I had cultivated, leveraging debt, schmoozing investors, projecting unearned confidence, were utterly useless in the real world. My first job was as a manager at a regional hardware store chain. It was a humbling experience, reporting to a man half my age who delighted in pointing out my mistakes. I was fired after 6 months for my inability to adapt to the company culture, which was code for my lingering arrogance. So I fell further. I became a salesman for a struggling printing company, then a driver for a courier service, a job that saw me delivering packages to the very skyscrapers where I once held court. I was invisible. People walked past me, looked through me, barked orders at me. I was no longer David, the millionaire visionary. I was just the delivery guy. And in that anonymity, in that crushing absolute invisibility, something unexpected began to happen. The ego, starved of the attention and validation it had fed on for 2 decades, began to wither. With nothing left to protect, no image left to maintain, the fortress I had built around myself began to crumble, brick by painful brick. The real turning point came during a particularly bleak winter. I was working a night shift at a 24-hour diner to make ends meet, pouring coffee and clearing tables. One night, a young couple came in, exhausted and worried. Their car had broken down, and they were trying to get to a hospital 2 towns over to see their sick child. They were short on cash for the bus ticket. Without a second thought, I took the $60 I had in my wallet, all the money I had to my name until my next paycheck, and gave it to them. The look of relief and gratitude on their faces struck me with the force of a physical blow. In that single moment, I felt a sense of value, of genuine human worth, that no multi-million-dollar deal had ever given me. I had made a real, tangible difference in someone's life, not for a plaque on a wall, but just because it was the right thing to do. That small act of kindness opened a door inside me that had been sealed shut for years. I started to see the world not as a series of transactions, but as a network of connections. I learned the names of the regular customers at the diner. I listened to their stories, their struggles, their small victories. I realized that for 20 years I had been surrounded by people, but I hadn't had a single genuine conversation. Everyone had wanted something from me, and I had wanted something from them. Here, no one wanted anything but a hot cup of coffee and a moment of peace. It gave me the courage to do the hardest thing I had ever had to do, call my children. Not to ask for anything, but to apologize. I didn't apologize for losing the money. I apologized for my absence, for the father I had failed to be. I apologized for teaching them that a person's worth was measured by their net worth. The conversations were awkward at first, strained and painful, but I kept calling. I asked about their lives, their studies, their dreams. I just listened. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to build a new relationship, one based not on a trust fund, but on actual trust. Eventually, I even had coffee with Sarah. We met at a neutral, anonymous cafe. There was no anger left, just a profound sadness for the years we had lost. I finally told her she had been right about everything, about Marcus, about Solara, about me. I finally admitted that I had let her down, not as a provider, but as a partner. We would never get back together, the damage was too deep, but in that conversation, we found a kind of peace, a forgiveness that allowed us to be friends. She told me she was happy, living a simple life, remarried to a kind man who taught history at the local college. She said he reminded her of the man she had first fallen in love with, the man in the garage with a dream. And that brings me here, to this counter, to this life. I didn't lose my fortune in a single day. It took 20 years of small compromises, of choosing ego over wisdom, of valuing applause over affection, of trading my integrity for the illusion of status. That $5 million check wasn't my great lucky break. It was a test. It was a magnifying glass that took the tiny latent seeds of arrogance and greed that exist in all of us and amplified them 1,000 times over. It was a test of character, and I failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. The profound lesson, the one that cost me everything to learn, is this. Money is a tool, nothing more. It can build a hospital, or it can build a prison of isolation around your soul. The choice is always yours. I lost an empire of things, of assets and accounts, but in the rubble I found my humanity. I discovered that true wealth isn't the ability to buy whatever you want. It's the ability to live without needing anything. It's a quiet conscience. It's a real connection with another human being. It's finding a reason to smile when you have nothing in your pocket. I am, by every conventional measure, a failure, but I have never, in my entire life, felt richer. If this story resonated with you, if there's a piece of my journey that you recognized, please share this video with someone you think might need to hear this message. And for my final question, I want you to leave a comment below with the most valuable lesson you have ever learned about money or about life. I will read every single one. Thank you for listening.